Today we have a internal speaker, and it's our guest speaker, but she's from our own church. And I basically see her growing up since elementary school, and I didn't know one day she will go to seminary school. And so she graduated from Biola Talbot Theological Seminary, and yeah, one of the best, right? Yeah, just 比正道差一点点而已。Just kidding. No, yeah, we're so happy that a lot of the seminarian, after they graduated, even though they may not serve full time, but they stay at 1.5 generation. I think we have 5 people. Other than the 2 pastors, Andy and me, there's at least 5 people who have finished their seminary training and they're serving in different fields. And then she went on to get a law school degree, and hopefully and very soon that she will. We will find out next week, right? That if she will pass, if she passed her bar. We're keeping her in prayers for this coming week, but we're happy to have our very own Angel who will preach today.
Yes, I'm on? Okay, great. Well, it's very great to be here this morning. I'm actually very excited. It's been a while since I last preached in the 1.5 service, and it's definitely great to be, to have this opportunity to be here and just to share. Now, this morning, I would like to talk from Daniel 1, as you can see. So how about let's all get out your Bible or your iPhone, smartphone, whatever it is that you use nowadays, and let's all just turn to the book of Daniel together. And if you're there, please just look up so I know that you're ready. All right, now before we begin, I would like to just start with a word of prayer this morning, okay? Let's pray. Father, we're just so delighted just to be here and just to worship you and just to have your word to encourage us in our life. And Father, I know that Lord, there's a great message that you want to share with each one of us this morning, Lord, because you love us so much. And Father, I just pray, God, that right now, Lord, would you just help us to come before you with an open heart. Help us to put aside, Lord, any worries, any things that we may be carrying in our life this past week. God, just help us to put it aside and just to come before you, Lord, and just to allow your Spirit to talk to us, Lord. And Father, I pray also, Lord, that you would use me, Lord, help me to be clear and to be concise, and would you help all the listeners, Lord, that we would together, Lord, receive from your Holy Spirit. So God, we thank you, Lord, and we give you praise and glory for this morning's time, and we pray all this in the name of Jesus. Amen. All right, so if you haven't studied the life of Daniel, and I do not mean our dear beloved Daniel here, he looked at me this morning, he's like, you're going to crack some joke on me, huh? And I told him, I thought about it. So if you haven't studied the life of Daniel, I would highly, highly encourage you to find time to read and study the book of Daniel. Daniel is a person who is known for his devotion to God, and he's also a man of integrity. But what is more important is that he lived in a time, in a society that is very similar to our society today. So that means we can learn a lot from his example, to see how he made a commitment to the Lord and how he was able to persevere in his faith, and how the Lord actually used him to bring glory to his name. So let's begin this morning. Let's go directly to the passage. So starting with verse 1. So in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord delivered Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the articles from the temple of God. These he carried off to the temple of his God in Babylonia and put it in the treasure house of his God. Now the first thing that that I want to bring your attention to is in verse 2. Now we notice here that the Israelites, they were taken by King Nebuchadnezzar to Babylon, right? But it says specifically here that it was the Lord who was the one who delivered King Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, and some of his people into Nebuchadnezzar's hand. Now what is really interesting here is, I'm sure you guys already know because Pastor Ben has talked about it many times in the past. There are actually different words that the Hebrew Bible uses when it refers to God, right? So the most common word that we often see in the Old Testament is the word El or Elohim. Basically, it means God or gods or something like that. It's a very generic term. Now there's also another word, another Hebrew word that we often see the Bible uses when it refers to God, and that is the word Yahweh. Now Yahweh is a very specific name that only God uses. There's no one else that is called Yahweh, and basically Yahweh means I am. So God is the I am, the great I am, okay? And oftentimes we see the word Yahweh, sometimes when it's not written down, but in the Bible it will designate it as Lord, much like here, except it's Lord, capital letters. So it's L-O-R-D, all in capital letters. So keep that in mind. Next time you read your Old Testament and you came across the Lord, it's all in caps. It's not because somebody made an editing mistake, forgot to change it to small caps, but rather it was very intentional that they are using Lord to refer to God as Yahweh, the great I am. Okay. But what's interesting here is the author actually uses another word for Lord in the Hebrew language, and that word is Adonai. Adonai. I know some of the worship songs. Adonai. Now, what Adonai means is Lord, yes, like master, owner, and someone who is sovereign. So what is interesting here is that the author of the book of Daniel started out talking about, a very bad event, which is that the Jewish people, they were captured, they're being exiled to Babylon by the Babylonian king. But even in the midst of their captivity, God was the one who was in control. It was the Lord, the ruler, and the sovereign, the owner of the universe, the creator God, who has control over rulers, kings, kingdoms, and nations. Now this is important going forward if you were to study the book of Daniel later on in the future, because what you're going to see is one of the important things in the book of Daniel is that God is the one that is in control and that he is sovereign. Even he was the one who placed King Nebuchadnezzar in the throne, given him the empire that he had. He was the one who used King Nebuchadnezzar to conquer a lot of nations. And after King Nebuchadnezzar, God was going to raise up the king of Persia to succeed. And then later on, we're going to see Alexander the Greek, and later on the Roman Empire. Now, very importantly, if you read the book of Daniel, eventually God's plan is to set up an eternal kingdom of God that will never perish, that will never fail, that will never fade away. So God is always in control, no matter what the circumstances may seem like. Even for Israel, when they were in probably one of the most terrible of their times, God was the one that was still in control. Now, the passage here says Nebuchadnezzar carried the king of Judah and some of the articles from the temple of his God to, what is the place called? Babylonia. Come on, guys, stay with me, okay? Babylonia, okay? It's in blue. Now, what's really interesting is, let's backtrack a little bit. Now, Babylonia is actually the equivalent of today's Iraq. Okay, so if you're a geography buff or nerd like me, basically Babylonia refers to Iraq. Now, what's really interesting is that Babylonia, if you read the Chinese, it actually translates it not as Babylon. Okay, it actually translates it as 是拿地. So Babylonia, in the ancient time, is actually the same place as Shinar, Shina. Now, if you're a Bible buff like me, I should say Andy, Dr. Andy, who reads commentary for fun, as I heard him share one time. Who does that, right? Shinar is a very significant place in Genesis, because back in Genesis 11, Shinar was the place where the Tower of Babel was built. It was, back in the days when people, they decided to get together and make a name for themselves, they decided to build this Tower of Babel, okay, to bring glory to their name so that everybody would see this huge, tall tower and that they would know that, oh yeah, it was these people who made it. Now we know that if you read chapter 11 of Genesis, you know that God was actually very displeased with what the people were doing. It was a very, very stupid thing for them to do. And as a result, God actually confused their language and scattered them all throughout the earth, right? So Babel, Tower of Babel represents, and also, same with that, Shinar, represents the idea of opposition to God. It was a place where man, or the enemy, wanted to oppose God. So it's very interesting that, the Israelites were going to be carried, or actually were carried, to Babylonia. Now Babylonia, again, has another name. It's called Chaldea, Jardi, okay, Jardi. Now if you read Genesis chapter 11 and 12, just immediately after the Tower of Babel story, you're going to find that God commanded Abraham's father, Terah, to take his family, leave the place of Chaldea, and go to the promised land. So Babylon, this is where the story is going to take place today. Babylon is a place that symbolizes opposition to God. Oftentimes, Babylon is also a symbol for overindulgence, materialism, wickedness, violence. So let's see what happened after Nebuchadnezzar carried the king of Judah, Jehoiakim, and some of his men to Babylon. So let's continue in verse 3. So then, this is after they arrived in Babylon, okay? So then the king ordered Ashpenaz, chief of his court officials, to bring in some of the Israelites from the royal family and the nobility. Young men without physical defect, handsome, showing aptitude for every kind of learning, well-informed, quick to understand, and qualified to serve in the king's palace. He was to teach them the language and literature of the Babylonians. The king assigned them a daily amount of food and wine from the king's table, and they were to be trained for 3 years, and after that they were to enter the king's service. Among those who were chosen were some from Judah: Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. Verse 7, the chief official gave them new names. To Daniel, the name Belshazzar; to Hananiah, Shadrach; to Mishael, Meshach; and Azariah, Abednego. That's a lot of names, I know. Now let's go back. Now what's really interesting here is, okay, just think, if you study history, most of the time, when a king or a country, an empire, carried people off into exile, into captivity, 被掳了, what is the usual treatment? Slavery, right? I mean, you put them to work, of course, free labor, who doesn't want that, right? But then, what is Nebuchadnezzar doing here? He's doing something that is very strange. But instead, he tells his chief of court officials, Ashpenaz, I want you to bring in the best of the best, the nobilities, the royalties, their sons, and then you know what? They have to be young men. Now, so young men here, they're probably referring to people who are about 14 or 15 years old. So I think pretty much everyone of here, we would disqualify for this thing that Nebuchadnezzar has set up, right? So they have to be young, they have to be without physical defects. So that means if you limp, you wouldn't qualify, or if you have a scar here, or maybe a birthmark here, you wouldn't qualify because no physical defect, okay? And you must be handsome. Good looking. Now, how many of you think you're handsome? Please don't raise your hand. Okay? And showing aptitude of every kind. That means they're smart, they're intelligent, they have the intellectual capabilities. And so these were the people that the king wanted. He specifically picked out these people, this elite group of young men from the captives. And then in verse 4, for the second part of it, we see that he actually offered them an opportunity to receive great education, to learn the Babylonian language and their literature. Now, if you study history, you'll know that Babylon was actually a very, very great empire. Okay, they had a huge library. They were a culture that studied, that was really into learning and knowledge. They developed their own mathematical system, their own philosophy. They were into astronomy and also astrology. But then the Babylonian culture was actually like a height of ancient civilization in terms of culture and learning and knowledge and education. So for the Israelites to be taken into captivity to a completely foreign land and expecting that they were going to be put into harsh labor, this was not what they were expecting. Okay? And not only did the king offer them great education, he even offered them food and wine from the king's table. Now, in our Asian culture, we have this thing. 如果要讲生意的话，就是吃饭时候讲最好 right? Somehow when we eat food, when we fellowship or talk over a meal, it kind of relaxes people and then you kind of cheer up, right? 像有时候 in my house, when I was younger, my relationship with my dad is very interesting. We kind of have this superior subordinate relationship. So when I was little, I would be like, I don't usually just go to him and then ask him for things. I usually go to my mom and then tell my mom and then have my mom pass the information to my dad. Okay. Now, as I started to grow up, I started to feel bad for my mom because I feel like why does she always have to be the middle person? And this is not right. Like if my relationship with my dad, were to improve, then I need to figure out a way to communicate with him. So I would start to catch him when he's at like the breakfast table or over dinner. 我就开始吃饭，然后就很紧张，吃饭很紧张，你知道吗？我就想吃，然后就，今天需要跟我爸讲一个什么东西，然后我就讲，然后吃到之后，我觉得，it seems like maybe he's like 60% full, seems like he's having a good time，然后我就，爸，那个我最近在想就是我想要做什么什么什么的，然后他可能就吃一吃，然后就 ，OK， 你跟妈妈讲就好了。然后我就 Oh my gosh， 还好 caught him in a good mood, at a good time, right? So something about food, food has a tendency to soul you can like win people's stomach, right? Like this trick that wives always use, like you make really good food, so you buy off you own your husband's stomach, so 他就永远就靠你 right? It's almost like this thing about food. So the king actually assigned them food from his own table. Why his own table? I'm sure he had a lot of great food. If he wanted them to be healthy, to be nutritious, he could have just ordered the chief to make some other food that's not directly from his table, right? But then he wanted them to like him, right? You're eating my food, I'm sharing with you. So that was very sneaky of him. And then of course, in the end, he said that they would have the opportunity to enter into service, to become almost like 公务人员, all this stable job. And what comes with that means they're also going to have elevated social status, right? Now, this was the king's plan. But what do you think was his intention behind doing this? I think we already mentioned it in our time here. He wanted to kind of gain their loyalty by providing them with a lot of good things, a lot of incentives. In some ways, we call this temptations. And then in the end, by the end of the 3 years, these people, they would be totally assimilated into the Babylonian culture. That they would be completely indoctrinated by the Babylonian thinking, to the point that they will probably no longer be Hebrews or wherever they come from. So the king actually had a purpose. It was a trap. It was a deceptive plan that he had to put these people, offer them these incentives, these good things. If you want to be successful, go through my program and I guarantee you, you will succeed and excel in my empire. But in the end, we know what his true intention was. And in fact, he not only wanted them to abandon their ethnic heritage, their culture, But then he also wanted them to also abandon their God, to turn away from the God that they used to worship. Now, in verse 7, we know that the king's official also gave them new names. To Daniel, he became Belshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach, Mishael, Meshach, and Azariah, Abednego. Now, what's really interesting here is, in their original Hebrew name, all of their names contain some sort of references to Yahweh, to God. Daniel means God is my judge. Mishael means who is what God is. Or basically, who can compare to who God is? God is great. And Azariah, Yahweh has helped. But then when they gave him new names, they intentionally replaced their name, the portion referring to their God, with a Babylonian god. I mean, come on, they could have given them a name like Ago, Amal, Ahua, right? But then why? 为什么要叫做 Belshazzar, right? I mean, there's so many names to choose from. But then it's interesting what Babylon was trying to do, what the king wanted to do. He wanted them to eventually abandon their relationship with their true God, their knowledge, their commitment, their loyalty to Yahweh, and began to serve him and the Babylonian gods. He wanted them to lose their identity and to lose their integrity. Now, bringing it to today, we are also surrounded by a Babylon of our own. Isn't it true in our culture we're beginning to focus a lot on family backgrounds? 像富二代、官二代，这些东西在亚洲特别的敏感. Maybe not so much in America, but in Asia, these terms are very sensitive terms, right? 如果你是在富二代家族的话，啊，你有福了 right? Or we're obsessed with looks, age, appearance. Everybody wants to look young, beautiful. 女生想要美白 right? I mean, you go to Sephora and then there's like a billion different anti-aging serums to pick from. It's stressful. Just last week, a sister from the church was asking me if I wanted something from Sephora, and I said, yes, I do want to buy something from Sephora, but I don't know what I want to buy yet. I need to do research. And I went home and I was like, this is stressing me out. I don't have time to do research. So in the end, I texted them and I was just like, you know what, just go ahead and buy it without me. Like, I don't have time to do research. It's stressful, right? I mean, we're constantly being bombarded by advertisements. The internet is powerful, right? TV used to be powerful. You turn on, there's advertisement one after another, especially with the holidays coming up. But then now we all have internet. You open up the internet, and then there's one thing that goes to another, goes to another, and goes to another. And then very soon, you're just being carried away by all these articles and being carried away by all these advertisements. Okay? Just this past week, I went online to look at, to check my email. And then right before, so I pulled up the homepage. It was a Yahoo homepage, right? And I saw this article about some, it was like the Russian president and China, you know, there's a lot going on this past week. So I wanted to go read that article. I was like, oh, this is important. It's a current event, right? And then I looked down. There was an article that says, how to dress like a French woman. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So I immediately, instead of going to the original article that I was going to look at, I clicked on that, how to dress like a French woman. So if you want to know how to dress like a French woman, come talk to me afterwards, okay? And I started reading, and then when I got to the bottom, there's another article that says, oh yeah, the best fall coat and jacket for the season. And I was like, oh yeah, I love jackets, right? So like I clicked on, I was like, okay, just one last article, and after I have to go back to the homepage and click on the original article that I was going to look at. And I kept going, and then toward the end, there's another article that popped up right at the end of my article that says, 5 classic hairstyles everyone can wear. And I was like, oh yeah, that's awesome! Girl, like we like to do our hairs differently. So like I got to the bottom, I clicked on that again, and then until the end, it took me I wasted 30 minutes just following all these fashion trends. And guess what? After today, I'm gonna be going to the mall, trying to figure out how to add a couple of French-looking accessories to my wardrobe. I'm gonna be thinking about how should I do my hair in the future, and I'm gonna show up completely different next week. Right? But this is the kind of culture that we're living in. We're being bombarded, we're inundated with all these culture, these cultural influences, these things that if you're not careful, you can be carried away very easily. Now, you might think that's funny, but think about the implication of that. It can influence us in a much deeper and greater level, right? Because the Western culture, look at Western culture alone. We are raised and taught to study hard, work hard, make a good living, climb the corporate ladder, and then begin to earn a lot of money, be in a high position, acquire a lot of things, right? But this is what the world tells us is the way to be successful. But then my question to you is, will owning things really, truly make you happier? Will owning things truly make you happier? Will acquiring good job and high position, climbing the corporate ladder, is that truly going to make you happier? Or is that just going to add stress to you? Now, interestingly, in a Time article this year, there was an article that's called, "Here's Proof Why Buying More Stuff Actually Makes You Miserable." I'm not going to read it to you. But apparently somebody has done some study and they found that, the more materialistic you are, the more you're into buying things and acquiring things, your self-esteem actually goes down. Your emotional health actually goes down. Now think about that. Is that true in your life? Will getting a new jacket for fall make you happier? Will getting that car that you've always dreamed of make you happier? House, iPhone, any electronic gadgets, does that truly make you happy? Now, one of the statements or points that this author actually makes is that it makes our self-esteem go down. And the reality is that materialism is actually a coping mechanism that we use in our life to make ourselves feel better. It's a way for us to feel like we're worth something as people. We started to use things and money to define our self-worth. Now that is very unbiblical, right? Because the more things we have, it gives us this false sense of security, thinking that, we can rely on our possession. I can rely on the amount of money that I have in my bank account. But you know what? All that money can be gone in a single night. And then where is your security going to be? Having things, temporary things, to make us feel secure causes us to become self-reliant. And when we're self-reliant, we're no longer reliant on God. It's difficult to walk in between reliance on God and self-reliance. It's usually one way or the other. And then only you know whether or not you're relying on yourself or if you're relying on God. Acquiring things to make us feel like we're worth somebody also causes us to forget that our worth comes from God. We are worth something. We have value simply because we are created in the image of God. We're worth something. We have value simply because God says that He loves us. No matter if you're handsome, beautiful, stupid, smart, or what, it doesn't matter. But then God says that because I love you, because I created you, you're valuable. You have worth. So don't let the world carry you away by all its trends and ways of thinking and just value systems. It's difficult to see past all that. But then as Christians, we must learn and ask God to help us see beyond the culture and the value systems that we're being fed every single day. Or otherwise, we too will lose our identity and integrity if we're not resolved to do that. So coming back to our story, out of all the people that were taken to Babylon, there were 4 young men who had a different conviction about what was going on, who saw differently. And out of those 4 men, there was one man, Daniel, who had the courage to speak up and to do something about it. So how did Daniel respond in a culture of overindulgence, inundation, materialism, success, wealth, and status, and all that stuff, like our own culture? So let's continue in verse 8. But Daniel resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine, and he asked the chief official for permission not to defile himself this way. Verse 9. Now God had caused the official to show favor and compassion to Daniel. But the official told Daniel, I am afraid of my lord the king, who has assigned your food and drink. Why should he see you looking worse than other young men your age? The king would then have my head because of you. Verse 11. Daniel then said to the guard, whom the chief official had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days. Give us nothing but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then compare our appearance with that of the young men who eat the royal food, and treat your servants in accordance with what you see. So the guard agreed to do this and tested them for 10 days. Now, so in verse 8, we see that Daniel, his response to being in that kind of environment was that, first of all, he was resolved not to defile himself with the royal food and wine. Resolve, what does resolve mean? Resolve, another word for resolve is determined, a firm determination. Okay, if you look at the Hebrew, it actually says placed in the heart or purposed in his heart. So it's an act of will. You know, he actually thought it out. It wasn't just like, oh, wonderful food, but I'm not gonna eat it, right? But instead, he had already had this notion thought out that he was going to not eat the food. He was going to not defile himself in this way. Okay. Now, why food? Why food? I mean, we all love food, right? So it's like, why did Daniel choose food out of all things? Now, of course, some of the commentators, they mention about how Daniel did not want to defile himself morally and ceremonially because, first of all, king's food was probably used during idol worshiping. Okay, so it was against the Hebrews, their laws to be eating those things. And also morally because some of the food weren't prepared right? Jews, they're very big on kosher food. You gotta make the food right. Or there are some meat that they couldn't eat. Now, these are all, good reasons and possible reasons. But what's very interesting is one of the commentators actually picked this up. And this commentator mentioned that in the Eastern Standard, which is, the Babylonian culture and Jews, to share a meal with another person is to commit to friendship with that person. Just like what we talked about. 我们华人吃东西很重要, right? Right? So Daniel here, he was saying, okay, you know what? You can make me learn your language. I can go to your school, learn your literature, and then even, work in your government. But then I will never become friends with you, Nebuchadnezzar. And I will never become friends with the Babylonian gods. So he drew a line. He separated himself. He made a distinction that I can do all this, but I am not going to cross that line and become a friend to you. I'm going to keep my identity, who I am. I'm going to keep my faith in God and my relationship to God. So similarly, we must also be resolved to be set apart from the world. We need to resolve to be set apart from the world. Now, for us today, the food laws no longer apply. But what is the thing that you need to have discernment and wisdom on, to know where to draw that line? It could be different for many of us. Maybe, perhaps, it's your lifestyle, the way you use your time, the way you use your money. Maybe at workplace, your work ethic, honesty, diligence, the way you treat your coworkers. Or even for some of the young people here, or maybe those of you who are working. How about your language? 你说的话. I mean, do you cuss so much that your other non-Christian friends don't even know that you're actually a Christian? Start to make a change in your lifestyle, in the way you do things, so that people can tell that you're not friends with the world, that you belong to God, that you're different. Now, what's interesting is that Daniel, he actually didn't just reject the whole entire Babylonian culture. He didn't try to escape, run away in the middle of the night and to go back to Judah or something like that, right? He didn't actually rebel against all the things that they were requiring him to do. But then instead he accepted. He accepted the fact that he lived in a Babylon and that there's all these things that he must do. But then he resolved not to become like them, not to become like Babylon. He set himself apart from the world. Now, there's a quote from a book called Change Agent by Oz Hillman. That's very good. It says, influence in culture is only possible when those who want to exert influence have a message and a life that others see and desire. This is the nature of a truly transformed life. Now, God didn't, save us and then take us immediately out of this world. He left us here in our community, in our society, and there's a reason for that. It's because he wants us to become the influencers in our culture, in our workplace. He wants us to influence our culture. But then how can we influence our culture when we're constantly being influenced by the culture? If you think about it, there's no gray area. You're either influencing or you're being influenced. And you don't just stand there, I'm not being influenced and I'm not doing anything to change anything. There's actually no gray area if you think about it. But then if we want to have godly influence on the culture, on the people that we live, or on the people that we live with, then our life, there must be a message and a life in us that people can see. And not only will they see it, but then they will desire it. Right? And that message is the message of the gospel, the message of the cross. That life must be the life of Jesus Christ in us. Now, what's really interesting is, Paul says that we Christians, we carry the aroma of Christ with us wherever we go, right? We carry the aroma of the knowledge of Christ with us. I remember 2007, my family, we went on a trip to Europe. We joined one of those Asian tours, and then at the tour there was another family from Texas, Asian family too. And then we spent we were about maybe 3-4 days into the tour. We got to talk, and then we're like, oh, you're from Texas, and they're like, oh yeah, we're from the city, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, oh, we also go to church, and we're like, oh really, we go to church too, we're Christians too. And then the next remark out of the mouth of the mother was very interesting. She said, oh, you guys are Christians too. No wonder, I sensed you guys were different from the beginning of the trip. And I was like, well, 什么意思? I was like, we're different, like, 我长得怪怪的吗? 还是什么样子? But then she was like, no, there's something different about your family. And I think that was a very interesting observation. And I remember Pastor Ben shared something very similar to this when they went on the Europe trip to Russia or stuff like that. Somehow, when we have the life of Christ in us, people can sense it. It can bring a change to the environment, to the culture that we're in. Okay. So if you want to be an influencer in the culture, you must have a message and a life that people can see and will desire. And how do you have that? You must spend time with the Lord. You must set yourself apart and to be used by the Lord. Okay? Now, a resolve must be followed by action. We see that Daniel was resolved. He had an act of will. He decided that this was what he was going to do. He was not going to, defile himself with the food. And he followed that with an action by actually going to the chief official and asking for permission to abstain from food. Right? If you just think, oh, I'll be a Christian, but then you don't do anything, people can't see it. What impact are you making? None. Okay, so there must be action. Now, when we began to want to make a stand for the Lord, to walk according to His truth, and also to walk in His righteousness and uprightness, you know what? We're going to encounter dark forces that's going to resist and push back. Okay? And so we must learn to depend on God and have a humble attitude. Humble ourselves and pray. In the passage, Daniel here, in verse 9, it talked about how God was the one who actually caused the chief official to have favor and sympathy and compassion on Daniel. You know what? Daniel could have just lost his head the moment that he spoke up about not wanting to eat the food, right? Because it was a direct insult to the king, right? So he could have lost his life. But then God was in the midst of all of that. And so when we want to start to make a stand for, God and begin to change our lifestyle, we're going to encounter pushback from others, from the enemy. But then we know that we don't have to be afraid because God is still in control. But we must humble ourselves and ask God and go to prayer and pray to ask the Lord to deliver us and to strengthen us, to change our circumstances so that we may walk in his righteousness and his way. And finally, in verse 17, or actually starting with 15, God honors and uses those who are willing to set themselves apart for him. At the end of the 10 days, they looked healthier and better nourished than any of the young men who ate the royal food. So the guard took away their choice food and wine they were to drink and gave them vegetables instead. To these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. At the end of the time set by the king to bring them into his service, the chief official presented them to Nebuchadnezzar, and the king talked with them, and he found none equal to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, Azariah. So they entered the king's service. In every matter of wisdom and understanding about which the king questioned them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters in his whole kingdom. And Daniel remained there until the first year of King Cyrus. So here we see God not only helped them pass the vegetable and water test, but God actually gave them understanding and knowledge for everything, for all kinds of literatures and learning. And to Daniel, specifically Daniel, God even blessed him with the ability to understand dreams and visions. So Daniel had this increased spiritual insight into things. He could understand, the time and understand what God wants him to do during that time period. So God is also looking for Daniels in our days now. Daniel, there wasn't just one Daniel. But then are you willing to be like Daniel, to be resolved in your in your understanding, and that to be resolved that you're going to set yourself apart from the Lord, that you're not always going to follow whatever the world tells us is the right way to go, but then instead you're going to put your trust in the Lord and trust that he is going to be the one that is going to deliver you, use you, and open doors for you. For those who are young still, I highly encourage you to begin to think about what are some of the things and areas in life that you can lay down the principle so that this principle can be your guide as you go forward in your life. For those of you who have children, begin to teach your children to walk in the ways of the Lord so that when they get to 14 and 15 years like Daniel and then comes across a difficult situation, they will choose to be resolved in their heart to follow the Lord. Okay, so let's pray. Worship team, let's come up. Father, we just give you thanks for this time that we have with you. Father, I just pray that your Spirit will continue your work in our hearts. Lord, I pray that you stir up our hearts so that we would desire more of you, Lord. That we would desire your righteousness. That we would desire your holiness. Lord, that we would understand that you're a God who is holy and blameless, and you have called us to be holy and blameless before you, Lord. Father, I pray, Lord, that your love would come and just cover us right now. God, I pray especially for those who may be struggling in their lives, in their relationship with you, or just in their walk at work, or just with their family, Lord. God, whatever they're struggling with, Father, I pray, Lord, that your love would just cover them, that you would comfort them, Lord. And God, that you would help them see that you have called them to a greater plan, to a greater purpose. And whatever struggle they're in right now, Lord God, you want to help them overcome. God, I pray, Lord, just for the young men and women in our congregation, God, that you would help us to be resolved in our heart to follow you for the rest of our life. And God, we ask for your grace and for your divine protection along this journey. God, help us not to give in to temptation, and help us not to give up when time gets tough. God, we want to be a people that can be used by you. We want to be a people that will bring glory to to your name. So God, would you come and empower us, encourage us to pursue you wholeheartedly. God, we thank you, Lord.